His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, President of the Government of Spain. I request protocol to escort His Excellency, and it is with great pleasure that I welcome His Excellency and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Excellent.
Mr. President, Excellencies, right at this very moment, as I begin my address to you, a pregnant woman from the Sahel is boarding an overcrowded plastic raft, risking her life to cross the sea in search of a better future. She knows that the end of the journey is uncertain because the Mediterranean has become the world's largest watery grave. She's fleeing hunger and drought, but she has no other choice. On the other side of the Atlantic, a family from Central America crosses into northern Mexico on foot because they are so desperate that no wall, however high, could stand in the way of their quest to find peace, food, and shelter for their children. Right at this moment, as I am speaking to you, a robot is operating with pinpoint accuracy on a patient in a Tokyo hospital, saving him from what years ago would have been certain death. And on the other side of the operating room wall, in the waiting room, the patient's loved ones are staring at the TV, watching a Waipai family cry inconsolably because their homes and their villages in the heart of the Amazon rainforest are being consumed by flames. And at the same time, in the bustle of the city streets, one of the thousands of couriers working in Manhattan, London, or Madrid is receiving an order that someone has just placed from their mobile phone. He will be paid mere pennies for each minute of the journey, but even so, he will get on his bicycle, he will make the delivery, and he will hope to receive another message soon and continue his working day. He has no other choice. What I am describing to you could easily be an extract from the screenplay of one of the many dystopian series on TV these days, but it's not. These are the real stories of real people who are crying out for us to take action. These are clear examples of the magnitude of the global challenges that we face today: climate emergency, hunger, migratory pressure, the technological and digital revolution, inequality, social and gender inequality, and hate speech. Mr. President, gathered here are some delegates from almost 200 countries that make up the UN. And I want to take advantage of the privilege it is for me to be standing here at this rostrum to launch a simple but resounding message. We must act. We must act now because the earth is bleeding. We must act and act now because the problems of our people simply cannot wait. We must act now because the challenges of this millennium are exceeding the limits and capacities of our nation states. We must act so this Assembly makes a difference. The Secretary-General has asked that of us. We offer fewer speeches and more plans. We must replace grandiose speeches with clear commitments. What our citizens want from us is actions, deeds, not words. Never before in the history of humanity has the need to design a shared world project been so critical and so urgent, and it is our absolute responsibility to establish our vision for the future. Please allow me to ask you a few questions. Are we clear about the problems we are discussing here today? Have we all reached the same diagnosis? Do we know the kind of world we want to leave our great-grandchildren? Have we decided what our role in this change is going to be? I would like to believe that we do know the answers to these questions. And in this spirit, therefore, allow me to raise Spain's voice and describe our contribution to answering these questions. Firstly, because it is abundantly clear to me as the Prime Minister of my country that the most urgent challenges are precisely those faced by the protagonists of the stories I've shared: hunger, the climate emergency, the digital revolution, economic and social inequality, violence of wars and discrimination, access for the disabled, all forms of discrimination. And secondly, because Spain advocates concerted global action, and that is why every time we come here, we invoke the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that is why we signed the Paris Climate Agreement and the 2030 Agenda with its 17 SDGs. And thirdly, we do know exactly what kind of world we want to leave our descendants. We want a world that is just, sustainable, and egalitarian. We want an international community that is committed to a new global social contract, Agenda 2030. We want governments that share a sense of responsibility, governments that are committed to the preservation of our planet, to sustainable development, and to the expansion and reaffirmation of the values of democracy. And lastly, we are very clear on the role that Spain wants to play. We are a committed, compassionate, and conscious society that takes the lead and wants to be at the forefront of major changes. At the 75th anniversary of this organization, Spain, which was one of the world's first modern states, was not, however, one of the founding states of this great institution, the United Nations. And we were not, for one simple reason. Franco's dictatorship, which held our country hostage for almost 40 years, it was a dictatorship that collaborated with the Nazis in the Second World War, and that was incompatible with our forming part of an organization that was created to promote democratic values and peace. Spain left behind that dark dictatorship 40 years ago, and it has succeeded in building a prosperous, decentralized state committed to diversity. Spain has one of the best healthcare systems in the world. It is one of the safest countries. Internationally, it is considered to be one of the world's strongest democracies, protected by robust safeguards. It's one of the world's preferred travel destinations and one of the best countries to live in. Today, Spain is an excellent country. On this day, the 24th of September 2019, a very important announcement was made. We have symbolically closed the democratic circle because the Spanish Supreme Court has just authorized the exhumation of Franco's remains from the public mausoleum in which he was buried with state honors. This is a great victory of Spanish democracy. Today, the 24th of September, we are now closing a dark chapter in our history, and we will start to remove Franco's remains for where they have lain indefensibly for far too long, because no enemy of democracy deserves to lie in a place of worship or of institutional respect. The Spanish people have chosen peace, freedom, and democracy. And with these tools, we are going to continue building the future. We want to share our achievements of these past 40 years and our transformative spirit. In our country, a great revolution is rising up that will change forever our vision of the world. I'm referring to the fourth wave of feminism. I can say with pride that in my country, Spain, the momentum of equality is unstoppable. And there are two dates on our calendar that exemplify this very well. One, the 8th of March, the International Women's Day, and the other is the LGBTI Pride Day. The dynamic voice of our women can be heard loud and clear in every corner of the country and of the planet. And machismo is not just a government concern, but a daily concern shared by the general public in my country. And the LGBTI community has given us a true lesson on human rights, because there is no better flag than that which embraces diversity as a source of human wealth. Mr. President, Spain is today a geostrategically significant power with an international vision, a committed democracy that has been actively participating for decades in UN peace missions and is implementing at the national level policies to further democracy and expand the rights and freedoms promoted here at the UN. And as a full member of this organization, we are also calling for change. The UN's historic contributions are many and they are undeniable, but our people expect even more from us. It would seem that our reflexes are slow and our response capacity at times is sluggish, and we are not going to be able to rise to the challenges facing us if we are not able to give the best of ourselves. And therefore, Now is the time for action. Distinguished Assembly, we are living in paradoxical times, times in which poverty and hardship are rubbing shoulders with the technological transformation and the digital revolution, times in which we are increasingly aware of what lies ahead of us and of how what happens on the other side of the world can have consequences in our immediate environment. And yet, we do not seem to be able to summon up the courage required to sit down together and forge the agreements necessary to address our common problems. Global challenges call for coordinated actions at the international level. They are expressions of a true change in era, of a new scenario in the history of humankind. Major transformations represent threats, but also opportunities. There are major opportunities, and that is why all responses based on maintaining the status quo or on returning to an idealized past are doomed to failure. Those who shut themselves away behind protectionism or ultra-nationalism, those who in short give in to fear, are profoundly mistaken. Looking back to the past will not make the future disappear. We will only succeed in erasing ourselves from the future. The changes I have mentioned are not going to stop. They are not going to respect borders or walls, however high. It is essential, on the contrary, to be aware that we can only reach this future if we face it with understanding, courage, cooperation, and leadership. If we are ambitious and aware that there is no realistic alternative to multilateralism today, the future will be what we want it to be. It is in our hands, and this House, the United Nations, has a great deal to say in this regard. It is possible. Let's make it happen. The Paris Climate Agreement and the 2030 Agenda, among other instruments, contain the diagnosis, the goals, and the roadmap. We have done our very best in these past few years to shape them and to reach a consensus, and it hasn't been easy, but we have done it. Because we need a future that includes everyone, that leaves no one behind, no country, no region, and no human being. Our current task is not to continue deliberating, but rather to make the SDGs a reality. The decisions we make now will shape the future for the generations to come, and therefore not acting is no longer an option. It is simply irresponsible. I've just referred to the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, and I want to stress that last word, which I think is essential in any speech about the future. I'm referring to the word sustainable. We can no longer accept anything that is not sustainable, and this, as you all know, is not an ideological position, but an irrefutable scientific fact. It is an irrefutable scientific fact. We need to save our planet, and nobody can stand on the sidelines of that responsibility. We are facing, as has been said here, a climate emergency that will accept no excuses. This emergency requires us to change the way we think, produce, and consume. We must act now to address the climate emergency, and we must do so through multilateralism, because Hurricane Dorian in the United States, flooding in Spain a few weeks ago, and desertification in Senegal are all symptoms of the same disease. Local and national solutions are very needed, but they are not enough, and so therefore we must act. We must commit, for example, to recognizing certain ecosystems as global public goods with their own special status. Spain is making every effort to form part of the group of countries leading the climate agenda. This is one of the main pillars of my government's program, and we want to demonstrate that with our firm commitment to action. We have set ourselves the goal of decarbonizing our economy by 2050 in a way that is socially just, compassionate and efficient, leaving no one behind. And to this end, we have presented an ambitious strategic energy and climate framework. We are framing the challenge of climate change as a great opportunity to transform our economic model, modernize our job market, create quality employment, step up energy security and innovation, improve the health of our citizens, and place our country, Spain, on the front line of the technologies that will be the most prominent in the coming century. The climate emergency also needs the mobilization of financial resources at every level. For this reason, I announced at the Climate Action Summit on Monday that Spain will contribute 150 million euros to the Green Climate Fund over the next 4 years. We will also ratify the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, and we will also contribute 2 million to the Adaptation Fund. I believe that all of us who are here today have seen the very recent photo of a few dogs pulling a sleigh across the melting Greenland ice sheet. It was not a hoax. The water temperature of this part of the planet has risen by 5 degrees just in 1 year. And this is a real wake-up call, just as it is to see helpless as the Amazon rainforest burns and the indigenous people are left helpless. If we carry on this way, we run the risk that Greta Thunberg will have to change the name of Fridays for Future. We are not reacting with the necessary commitment. We have to implement the framework of the new protocol and regenerate our ozone layer. We have good ideas, but we must sit down and talk about the Green New Deal. Mr. President, we need greater social justice. The so-called millennials, centennials today have 20% less possibility of being in the middle class than their parents do. They also have less of an opportunity of having good jobs because today we have many university graduates on the breadlines. Some recent reports say that in 2030, 1% of the global population will have 2/3 of the wealth of our planet. And this is a dramatic figure. It's not the worst figure of all, because according to FAO data, more than 800,000 people on our planet are suffering from hunger in the world. The concepts of sustainability, of justice and human dignity cannot be understood if we do not combat hunger and poverty. I believe all of these concepts are set forth in the 2030 Agenda, and they demand that we transform our societies from top to bottom, structurally. But we cannot truly talk about progress if we do not put human beings at the center of our policies, because progress requires a progressive response. Globalization must be based on rights, on actions, on freedoms that put the brakes on inequality and environmental degradation. Ultimately, everything is connected. Industrial relocation generates unemployment in regions of departure and environmental impacts in regions of destination. Global warming affects the livelihoods of the countries of the South and triggers migration to the North. The rich countries of the North succumb to the allure of hate speech and blame migrants for their first world problems. Unequal social benefits offer an easy foothold to illiteracy and pandemics in developing countries. We must act. Spain, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, has every intention of doing so. I would like to share 2 important announcements with you. The first is that Spain will contribute 100 million euros over a 5-year period to the UN's Joint Fund for the Sustainable Development Goals. And furthermore, the second announcement is that we will rejoin the community of donors to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, making a contribution of 100 million euros over the coming 3 years. Mr. President, let us also speak about technological transformation and changes in the world economic order. The digital revolution, as you all know full well, has deeply transformed our societies, and it will continue to do so without our being able to envisage the limits of its influence and its potential risks. Our systems and patterns of production, consumption, health, transportation, and even socialization and security are radically changing. The mobile technology we all have in our pockets is greater to that which was used to first send a human being to the moon. We now face new, previously unimaginable phenomena that can undermine states. Cyber attacks and fake news constitute different manifestations of the use of technology as a transnational weapon of attrition. However, Big data, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, these are advantages that only a part of the world has access to, because not all the world can be operated by a robot, because inequality also exists with respect to technology, because fighting to close the digital gap is also an SDG. In the face of the disruptive nature of this revolution, those of us in public office must be vigilant in ensuring that progress is at the service of human beings. The jobs of the future will be different, but they must be decent jobs. Has often been said, the transportation of the future will be faster, but our children need a future that will provide them with decent jobs. The transportation of the future, as I say, will be faster, but it must also be sustainable and affordable. The future we want must also be capable of creating wealth and of distributing it fairly. However, trade tensions represent a significant threat to prosperity, and the stability of the world economy is at stake. In the face of distrust and dirty dealings, it is necessary to build bridges. An example of this are the new trade agreements reached between Mercosur and the European Union, which commit to opening our economies to trade while protecting workers' rights and environmental rights. Because the outbreak of a trade war of unforeseeable consequences can and must be avoided, it is in our hands to abandon unilateral actions and to resolve our differences in the framework of a rule-based multilateral system of trade, with the WTO at its center, which obviously must be reformed. Mr. President, allow me to repeat that my vision of a world cannot be understood without one basic principle, and that is gender equality. Gender equality, equality between men and women. I have said it many times before, and I will say it again today. I am a feminist Prime Minister, and I am honored to form part of a feminist government. My commitment in this regard is absolute. That is why Spain will fight against machismo here and within the European Union, and fight against gender violence, incorporating the recommendations of UN Women and promoting a European strategy on gender in the UN. We will work towards a joint definition of femicide and harmonize legislation in this area. We will continue leading the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We've also promoted, along with Finland, the 2025 Commitment Initiative, with ambitious commitments to ensure within a 5-year horizon the inclusion of women in peace processes as a rule and not as an exception. During this session, we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We will staunchly defend the consensus reached over more than 2 decades. We cannot take a single step backwards on issues such as universal access to sexual and reproductive health. We cannot stand by while women are being tricked into boarding unseaworthy vessels by sexual exploitation mafias. We cannot stand by and allow forced marriages or female genital mutilation. We cannot stand by while the rights of half the human race in every corner of the planet continue to be threatened. We must act. Mr. President, migration is an inherent aspect of the human condition, and it is an extraordinarily complex phenomenon in today's society. That is why we have the obligation to regulate it. When migration is safe, orderly, and addressed following a comprehensive approach, it enriches everyone involved. Spain is strongly committed to close cooperation between countries of origin, transit, and destination. So we must say no to crude and simplistic policies that are born out of hatred and contempt. We must continue to work to find a joint and coordinated response to the humanitarian challenge of migration. We must comply with our commitments to international humanitarian law. The Marrakesh Agreement, we must be consistent and face up to our responsibilities as countries of refuge. We must abandon the current dynamic of short-term solutions. We must have a compassionate global response. Mr. President, I am concerned by the current international conflicts, the consequences of war, geopolitical tensions that always end up affecting the weakest, the most vulnerable, in particular women and girls. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees continues to report alarming figures. 70 million people are victims of forced displacement, and among them, almost 26 million are refugees. This is unacceptable. I'm concerned by the potential regional impact of the crisis in Syria, where war is being unleashed and to a large extent reproduces the chessboard of world geopolitics. Spain is a country of opportunities, and despite the major challenges facing Africans, 6 of the 10 countries with the highest growth rates in the world are in Africa, and that is why we'll become directly involved in contributing to the full development of its capacities and its transformation into a continent of opportunities, a continent of peace. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains unfinished business for the international community. Spain is firmly committed to a two-state solution. We advocate respect for and application of the UN gains. Israelis and Palestinians have the right to live in peace and security in their own states, and the international community must support them in the process of reaching an agreement. The situation in Western Sahara is also on the agenda. As a government, we defend a central role for the United Nations, and we wish to contribute to the Secretary-General's efforts to reach, according to Security Council resolutions, a just and lasting and mutually acceptable political solution under the principles and objectives of the UN Charter. I am concerned by the heightening of tensions in the Gulf and the possibility that the wrong response could trigger a conflict with extremely serious consequences in the Near East. We call on the regional parties and stakeholders to act with restraint, and we applaud mediation efforts. The dismantling of the nuclear deal with Iran would constitute a huge international failure. It is a key element in the fight against nuclear proliferation and an essential milestone for the security of the region. The situation in Syria is one of the most dramatic. We are in Spain greatly concerned with this issue. 8 years of conflict have left a chilling balance. More than 400,000 deaths, 5.6 million refugees, 80% of the Syrian population below the poverty threshold, and 11.7 million people with humanitarian needs. The United Nations can offer a way out of this civil and humanitarian conflict. Utmost pressure must be exerted, and Spain commits its full support to the Secretary-General's Special Envoy. The global threat of terrorism still looms. Returning foreign terrorist fighters are a source of concern for governments. It is essential to promote international judicial cooperation to control their movements, as well as to obtain evidence and to ensure the proper treatment of prisoners. All of this without forgetting the due solidarity we must pay to victims of terrorism. I cannot fail to mention the situation of a sister country, Venezuela. Spain hopes that Venezuelans themselves will be the ones who decide freely the country's future. We believe it is essential that presidential elections be held which are free, democratic, and transparent, protected by all necessary safeguards. This is the only way to return to democratic and institutional normalcy in the sister country of Venezuela. Moreover, there is another international event which, although it is not violent in nature, concerns me nonetheless. As you all know, the United Kingdom has decided to withdraw from the EU. I respect this decision, although, as I have said on a number of occasions, it saddens me greatly. I hope that the UK will withdraw in an orderly manner to the benefit of British and European citizens, and to the benefit, too, of economic agents which require legal certainty. The deadline is looming large, and we must spare no effort in attempting to achieve an orderly withdrawal. The UK's departure from the EU will obviously have consequences for Gibraltar, and I hope that, respecting UN doctrine, with which Spain is fully compliant, we will be able to develop an area of prosperity that encompasses Gibraltar and the neighbouring Campo de Gibraltar and achieve social and economic convergence for the entire region. Mr. President, I'm going to end this address by returning to my initial reflections. To achieve the world we want, we need a method for action. We must bolster multilateralism. It is the only tool that offers a solution to the challenges that we have named: hunger, the climate emergency, the digital revolution, economic and social inequality, gender inequality, violence of war and discrimination. It troubles us to see that certain parties question most elemental points of consensus in this area. Retreating behind protectionism and ultranationalism threatens the norms that contribute to peaceful coexistence, progress, and global prosperity. And that is why we must equip multilateralism with the capabilities necessary to ensure that it is active, inclusive, and effective. And we therefore support the UN Secretary-General in his efforts to reform this noble organization. Mr. President, while I have been speaking, some of the migrants fleeing poverty will have realized their dream of achieving a better future. I hope that thanks to the response that we decide on today to tackle the climate emergency, the fields of their native lands will become fertile once more so that no one else is forced to leave ever again. In these past few minutes, a patient has been cured thanks to artificial intelligence. I hope that technology continues progressing to improve the lives and welfare of all people. Not just a few, but of all people. And in these past few minutes, many couriers have arrived at their destinations on their bicycles and have delivered their orders. And I hope that once again in the future they will have decent working conditions. Mr. President, what we want to do is to make the United Nations a leading actor in the world we want. Let us make that a reality for the countries here. Let us make this organization one that acts and acts now. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Government of Spain, His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez-Castejón, for his statement. And I request protocol to escort His Excellency.